So one of the questions that keeps coming in, and it's actually a really good question, pertains to the max effort days and the use of bands and chains on max effort days. So kind of a very basic overview of what my thought is on it is for a beginner lifter especially, but anybody that's kind of new to conjugate, I would not recommend using a ton of band or chain, or really any band or chain for the first at least couple of waves or couple cycles of cycling through movements. There are a couple of reasons why. If you have a beginner lifter or someone that's not used to doing specialty bars, you kind of want to get a good feel for the bars, and you kind of want to understand what each bar does and what mechanism it works. So we'll kind of talk about just a squat day for that, just to kind of go through it kind of simply. So if you're using a safety squat bar, using a camber squat bar, a Duffalo squat bar, doing a front squat, doing a pause squat, and a competition squat, those are all vastly different exercises. They all target different muscle groups, more and less based on how the bar moves and where you're weak and where you're strong. And it has a really good indicator of pointing out strengths and weaknesses within your squat mechanic just by varying the bars. So it's safe to say that if you've never squatted on a safety bar, or you do it and use it in your training program, but you've never really maxed it out. Let's say you max it out, a safety bar squat at 315 with 3 plates on each side, which would be 335. It's very reasonable to think that within a couple of weeks or even the next week, you can very easily go 5 pounds more or even 10 pounds more. So you can easily use a safety squat bar without any accommodation for your max effort day for squat 2 or 3 times before you even get to a point where the weight starts to drag down. That said, using the accommodating resistance, when I'm doing that on my max effort stuff, I kind of go through a checklist of questions as to why I'm using it and what I'm using. So the first is, did I vary the movements enough that I kind of have worn out that mechanism? Is my pressing mechanism not really getting too much stronger right now based on the movements that I had in there? So at that point, I either cycle in different movements or I start adding the accommodation. So that's the route we're gonna go here. So how long has it been? How long have I been using the same movements? If I'm using 4 movements, let's say for round numbers, there's 4 weeks in a month, that means that I'm using the same movement once a week for 4 weeks for 3 or 4 months. Has it been a long enough duration or a short enough duration that it's time to change out the movements, or did I just wear those movements out like completely and I need to pull them out and put new movements in? All right, so that's kind of number 1 question. Number 2, if I've used the same 4 movements, let's say, and I found the same sticking point. So let's say that for a bench press, I used a Swiss bar for a max effort, a close grip, a 1 board press, and a wide grip press, let's say. If I'm sticking about 2 or 3 inches off the chest on every one of those mechanisms, it's a pretty good indicator that that's where I'm weak in that movement. So this is where the accommodation can kind of come in and be helpful in this area, where you can use the chains and the bands to start pushing through those sticking points. And if you're using the bands, like we talked about in the other video, that rewards speed. So it teaches you to go a little bit faster to blast through the sticking points. If you're using chains, it gives you a good ability to grind. So myself, I know that I'm not good at grinding weight, and I know that I'm a very fast lifter. So for my max effort work especially, I'm gonna benefit more from using the chains. It's gonna be harder, but it's gonna have a better carryover because it's gonna teach me to strain under time and grind the weights, as opposed to the bands, where when you start slowing down with bands, you're done. You kind of get stapled there. Controversially, if I know that I have a good ability to grind, and I can take a bench press and I can ride it all the way out and inch it all the way up, my first thought would be to get faster, so the sticking point, I don't reach the sticking points with the same speed. I would more speed to push through the sticking point. So I would put bands on that lifter in that movement. So it's not a cut and dry, do this, do that, but even just taking a bench press, my close grip bench press, I could have a straight weight, 1 chain on each side, 2 chains on each side, 3 chains on each side. Same thing with the bands. We can go red, we can go green, we can go orange. And every one of those, so even within that close grip, that was 3 chain movement variations, 3 band movement, plus the straight weight. So we have 7 movements and 7 PRs that we can hit and cycle through within just the close grip bench press. And that's not a specialty bar, that's not even moving the grip to comp grip or wide grip. So you can see that you can get really lost in this rabbit hole, and there can be like a tremendous amount of max effort movements that you're rotating through. When that happens, that's where I think people run into a problem. It's because they don't know anymore what a good indicator lift is, and they don't know what's actually working or not. They're just going through and they're straining on max effort day, but they don't have any way to gauge whether or not they're actually getting stronger in the competition lift. So that's where people, I think, sometimes get a little off track on conjugate, and they get so far away from what they're doing that when it comes time to go back to straight weight competition, pause bench press, it becomes a foreign movement now, and they have to almost retrain that movement because they got so far away. So it's definitely a balancing act. Injury. So when I started doing conjugate, I did not use any accommodation for my max effort work for bench or deadlift, and I haven't until very recently. Now I've been doing this now for almost 8 months, which isn't a tremendous amount of time, but it's a good enough time to have a good feel on the program. I started my squats with accommodating resistance, and the reason was my hips were so beat up and so sore from the previous linear program I was doing. They needed a break. So a great way to still strain very heavy for me in the bottom of the squat was using the accommodated resistance. So it deloaded at the bottom, and then I could push very hard. I didn't have any pain on the concentric, I just had pain on the eccentric. So when I was loading, it felt good to deload the weight at the bottom, no pain, and then I could fire as hard as I could and strain as hard as I wanted to, again, and not have any pain during the movement or the next day, which was huge. It allowed my hips to heal. Now I don't have any pain, and I think that doing the squats that way was a huge contributing factor to letting me work very hard, still push my strength up, and work on everything I needed to without aggravating and picking the scab of the injury over and over and over. So the speed strength I kind of already went into. Again, when you're picking, just like on dynamic days, if you know you're a fast lifter where you have good bar speed, but you don't have a good ability to grind, or if you're a strong lifter where you know you can grind the bar very, very well, but when you get to your sticking point, you can't push through it because you don't have enough speed, that will dictate a little bit what's going to have the bigger carryover initially with the chains or bands. So we kind of covered that a little bit already. And then stability. So using the chains, the bands don't really have the ability to do this, but the chains do. The bands will put you on rails. So if you're set up correctly, or you set up to put yourself at a disadvantage, the band will hold you in a line and keep you there for the entire rep and the entire exercise that you're doing. The chains, however, if you raise the height of the chain, so typically when we're talking about chains and deloading the chains, the bottom of the motion, so the bar on the chest, us at the bottom of the squat, or the barbell on the ground for the deadlift, the chain is completely deloaded. There is no additional weight from the chain. As soon as we start to drive the barbell for the lift out of the hole, the chain starts to accommodate. Now, for a squat or a bench press, if we hung the chains a little bit off the ground, so when the bar is touching our chest, we had 3, 4, 6, or all of the chain off the ground at that point, that's gonna give us, it's gonna destabilize the barbell on the negative and on the positive. So it's going to make you have to work very hard and stabilize the barbell as it comes down, and especially as you're catching up speed with reps. The faster you go, the more the chains will swing, the harder it's going to be able to control the barbell. So if you know they have a stability problem, it may be worth taking a look at setting up the chains in a way that are going to destabilize the movement slightly. And again, the higher the chain, the more it's going to destabilize. Start small, work your way up. But that's just another added benefit to the chains, is you working on stabilizing strength during the movements on max effort or dynamic days. So I hope that helps.